Welcome back to Rusty Relic Revivals, everybody. Appreciate you tuning back in. I know I haven't been on in a while. Life's been real crazy, and I've actually done some repairs, but it's been kind of short notice, emergency type stuff, so I haven't even really thought about documenting it. You know what this is. This is the green monster truck, as the boys call it. I got in it the other day and started up. I had to boost it. Battery was dead. I thought, well, that's odd. Maybe been sitting a little while. Maybe that's just a weird fluke. So I boosted it off. It ran okay. Next time I went to move it, just a while ago, I had to boost it again. And I got it running, fired right up, but the gauge for the charge never went past about right there. Just barely came off the bottom and sat right there. So never had an issue charging before. I thought that was pretty abnormal. So I thought, you know, it's only showing about 9 or 10 volts. That's not right. I'm gonna check it out. So I did. Came around here with my Harbor Freight Special digital multimeter and just put it on DC volts up to 20, turned it on, ground to ground, hot to hot, just to get a voltage reading while it was running. Of course, I'm not going to do it now for the sake of noise and just catching you up on what I've done, because I realized, hey, this would be a good opportunity for a video, because I don't think everybody necessarily knows how to investigate and narrow this down. So anyway, I took a voltage reading, showed about 9 or 10 volts, which is what the gauge showed on the dash. That's obviously not right. So I did a little bit of wiggling of the wires. This is the plug that goes in the back of the alternator. These are the wires that come out. They're kind of hardwired into the alternator. Looks like it's been replaced at some point in the past, because it's got some wires that splice together here when you replace it. So I thought, well, maybe a wire is loose. Maybe one of these connections right here has broken down, got, you know, corrosion or something. So I kept my voltage meter on the battery while I was watching it, while I was running. Careful of the fan, alternator fan. I started wiggling these wires. This wire and harness plugs into the alternator, everything. I couldn't get any voltage reading difference. So everything I did and the voltage was still showing like 9 or 10 volts. Nothing was spiking or fluctuating or anything. So that tells me it apparently is not charging. My thought was alternator. So I shut it off. That's where I'm at. I said all that to catch you guys up on my thought process, what I've looked at so far. All right, moving on from here, what I'm going to do is check for continuity, which is resistance or lack thereof, between these two hot wires. They come out of the alternator right there, and they go through this harness, which is here, that harness right there, and they snake around and come up into this guy right here. So all of that harness down here that I was wiggling comes into this wire, which goes into these wires and connects to your starter solenoid, which then connects to your hot cable for your battery, which then connects to here. So what I'm going to do is check for continuity, basically meaning, I'll let that refocus. There we go. Basically meaning, is there continuous flow of current from the hot battery post all the way to what's supposed to be these hot wires on the alternator. And if I check from the battery post all the way down to here, and I have very little resistance, which would be my ohm reading, then that tells me that there's a good connection between that point all the way up to that point, and I've not got a wiring issue. So I'll show you how to do that now. All right, just in preparation, I took that vacuum box out. You just pop these lines loose. There's a nut under here. Mine was actually missing that nut, so it came out real easy. Pop that vacuum box out. Tied up the heater hose with a loose bungee cord over to a hood hole. Not real tight. You don't want to put any extra tension on that, just to get it up out of the way. Now I can get down to the alternator. I got a good easy access there. I had it on DC volts. I'm going to change it and go to ohms, which is resistance. And I'm going to go way down here to, I'm going to do I'm gonna do 200 ohms just between these 2 points on the battery terminal. 2 ohms. So that's a straight piece of metal, straight connection, very little resistance. Little resistance means good connection. High resistance means not good connection. So the first thing I'm gonna do, I want to get a good connection on my hot. Right here's a little place I can wedge that between the winch cable. Just to verify I've got a good connection there, I'm going to touch the battery post. Yep, down to 2 ohms. So a good connection on the alternator would mean all of my wiring between here, up through here, back to the battery is good. So I'm going to go in this fat plug, or this big wire going into the plug, 2.0 ohms resistance. I can wiggle this wire, nothing changes. So between the alternator and the battery, I've got two 1.9 ohms resistance. I'm gonna go this other big wire here, 1.9 ohms resistance. Again, wiggle this wire, wiggle this harness, nothing really changes. So that tells me I have a good connection between the two hot wires that come off the alternator and the positive lug on the battery, which means if it's charging, it has a way to get back to the battery. Now one of these, this white one that you have to splice in, should go to, I believe it goes into, yeah, like a copper color with a black stripe, which should be this middle one. So now I'm going to make sure that it has a good connection with the other end of it. There's that, and let's see, move that wire out of the way so we can see. 2 ohms. Again, wiggle that wire, wiggle that connection. It doesn't change, 2 ohms. Based on that logic, all the wiring from here back to the hot terminal of the battery seems to be good, but when we're running, we're only putting out 9 or 10 volts. Should be putting out like 14.2, 14.3, something like that, and we're not. So that tells me I believe the alternator is bad. Most alternators, things like that, I have spare parts for, but I do not have a spare one of these, I'm pretty sure. So I'm gonna get it off, we'll go to the store, get it tested. They still test them for you. All right, I'll show you real quick. Always before you start working on the alternator, disconnect the negative battery terminal, just to make sure there's no completed circuit for anything to short out on. Just get a heavy pair of lineman pliers or whatever. There's that one, and that one, right up at the crimp. And then I'll cut this one. There we go. So there's your factory wiring, the small wire, 2 big wires, and then the new alternator comes with this little, not even really a pigtail, but these 3 little wires stubbed out of it. And this block right here that you would think is a plug does not come out. That's hardwired in. So the only plug is this one here. And then you just cut these wires off. I don't really care for that design, but that's just how they are. So the only thing holding us on is the mechanical attachment, which would be a bolt there, bolt there. Take the belt off, and then we should be home free. 16 millimeter socket on this tensioner right here. You know, pull some tension up, then take the belt off the pulley. I'm just going to put the belt up here for now. Came loose pretty easy. 14 millimeter there. I'm actually going to leave that in just a little bit. Let's see, this on a 14 as well. Let's see if I can get that loose. For something that's not been off of there in years, that actually came loose pretty easy too. Actually used this thing a lot since I've had it, more than I thought I would. That bolt out. Should be ready ready to roll out of there. Almost. There it goes. And there it is. Time to talk a few technical details here. So this is the one we took off. That's the top wire. These are the two battery hot wires that we had to cut the connection. If you remember, we had to cut that connection because they were hardwired into the harness on the vehicle. I got to looking through the parts stash, doing some studying on it, and I found this one. This is off, I would say, a mid-80s probably Ford truck. Definitely new enough to have serpentine pulley. So probably newer than like 82 or 3. So I think that's when they went to serpentine, maybe 4 or 5. So this is probably mid-80s Ford truck. This plug up here is the exact same as what's in the green monster truck. This is just like the plug that was in here on the truck. So that's the same. This plug, if you'll notice, has 2 very heavy gauge wires and a white wire on top. Bottom is 2 heavy gauge wires, top is a white wire. They go together into this harness, which is not cut. It actually plugs in over at the fender, like I said, on like a mid-80s. So this harness I'm not going to cut, but I got to thinking, if I unplug this harness, this alternator should work on that truck, as long as I have a way to connect these wires to this location on the alternator. Now, I have to use my third hand here. Let's see if I can set this up where you can see what I'm doing. All right, so we're gonna get on our handy dandy Leatherman. No, they don't pay me to be on here. Nobody pays me to be on here. It's quite the tool. You should get one. All right, I'm gonna pop this plug loose here. And then we'll pop this plug loose. Looks like there's just one little retainer at the top and one at the bottom. There we go. So we took that harness off. That is what the factory plug would have looked like on the green monster truck. They were having trouble somewhere along the way with this part of the harness, this plastic plug part, melting or shorting out on the alternator end, somewhere between that plug and that location on the alternator. The plug was getting melted on and breaking down and shorting out and all that stuff. So what they did is they started hardwiring the wires into that part of the alternator and said, we'll just have them cut the shorted out plug off of their truck and splice into that harness. So they would have you cut this plug right here, splice into here. This is a good harness. This actually has never been cut. So I don't want to do that to this one. However, this is a 92 Bronco, had a 302 V8. And looky what I think is in here. Yep, right there. There is the alternator wiring harness. That's the one that goes in the top. That's the one that goes in the alternator. It actually looks like it's in pretty good condition. And I think it should just pop off. I'll do a little wiggling to get it out of there. But that is the entire alternator wiring harness from a 92 Bronco. And we're going to use it on a 92 F-350. That's why you keep parts trucks, folks. All right, so we're back under the hood of the green monster truck here. This is the plug. This is the, sorry, I need to get a better way to video. I'm sorry, guys. Just want to make sure I get all the details. You might need to know this. This is the plug that was in the top of the alternator. And this is the 3 wires that were along the bottom. So it's hardwired into those 3 right there, right? The only thing on this harness is the alternator. So it goes from here back along here. This is what we just popped out of the Bronco parts truck, we popped that little retainer clip. So we're gonna pop that one out of here. Oops, I stopped there. You can, yep, pop that one out of there. Follow it along. Popped it out there. We follow this along. It goes down here and goes up right here and comes into just this one single wire, which then routes here and just goes by itself under that hot terminal on the starter solenoid. I really don't like splice wires if you don't have to. They're okay, but if you don't have to, factory is better. So 92 F-350, 92 parts Bronco. We are going to use the original harness off the Bronco, and that way we'll get rid of that splice joint, and I think it's going to put us back in business. Oh, and I had the parts alternator as well. So far I still haven't spent any money. This is the alternator we took off. This is the one we're going to put on. As you can see, the pulley is pretty ugly, a little bit rusty, but it was a good alternator when I took it off. So looks like it's been sitting in the dirt for a while, because it has, but we're going to stick it on and try it. What I'm going to do is change the pulley in the fan, and I think it's 15/16. Yeah, 15/16. Just take that nut off right there. We're going to swap those pulleys just because that one is much cleaner. We got those pulleys and fans swapped out. Just a quick zippity-doo-dah 15/16 socket on the impact. You can hold it with your hand and it'll zip it right off there. So now we are ready to put this thing on. Well, I was rolling along trying to get this thing installed. Got the bottom bolt in here, and I realized these plugs are not going to work because that plug's up there, that plug's right there, that needs to be on around here. Pretty sure there's 1, 2, 3. I think there's 3 bolts that hold this thing together. We could pop those loose, clock the case a little bit differently. So we've run into a small technical difficulty. I took the alternator back off. Now I'm looking at it a little bit closer. Probably should have looked at it closer to start with, but what the problem is, this upper plug, I've got the long sleeve part of the alternator oriented to the bottom on both of these, okay? So this part of the case is the same. If you look at the alternator housing, this plug points up this way on this one, and it points over that way on that one. There's 3 bolts that holds the case together. There's one there, and one there. And there's the same 3 bolts here. 1, 2, 3. What I'm going to do is pop this housing off, taking those 3 bolts loose, take the housing off, clock it 1 set of bolt holes, and then put it back on. So those 3 bolts are the same distance between each other, and you think you can pick this housing up, rotate it 1 set of bolts, put it back on, and then this plug will then point the same direction as that plug. So I'm going to try that. I'll try to put it on time lapse so you can see what I'm doing, but I really need both hands for that, so just bear with me. All right. I don't know if you could see there in the time lapse or not, but one of my bolts broke off, one of these bolts here that holds it together. Of course, this is the one we took off. I used it for reference throughout the project. This is the one that I was gonna reclock, but when that bolt broke off, I had to go to one of my other ones that I knew this was a bad alternator, but it had good bolts, so I took the bolt out. But then when the bolt broke off in here, this is the front plate that was on there, there's the broke off bolt. So then I had to take the front half of that alternator apart so I could get this housing off of it. So I reused this housing off of this alternator and put it with the back half of the one we had, and reused the armature of the one we had. This is the armature, and that's the bad alternator. That's pretty chewed up right there, but the one we had was good. So we've got the front housing off of another spare alternator that was bad. We used a screw off of that alternator that was bad, and then we reclocked the back half of that alternator to match up with the one we removed from the truck. So now if you look straight down, this is the long hole, I'll call it. So you got the long hole on the bottom. You got this plug pointing straight that way. And you got the 3 wires here plugged this way, and this plug this way. So that's the same, that's the same, that's the same, and the top mounting point is the same. So it took me a minute because that bolt was broke off, but we got it reclocked. We're gonna try to put it on again now that we have it in the right position. Stick that down there. Got that bolt started on the bottom. I can tell this plug's gonna be in the right place. This plug's gonna be in the right place. Should be able to just start this top one. Okay, belt routing looks good. Arches are right here. This goes on the top. There we go. Clip, clip. This is that vacuum hose we took loose. Presses on there. That's where that goes. That's where the heater hose was. There's that. Everything's clear of the alternator. We got the switch on. Transmission to neutral. That's important, especially for straight shift. We've got our alternator connected. I like to boost it because the battery is so dead. If you haven't got one of these little gizmos, they are quite phenomenal. They will boost stuff like this, believe it or not, if the clamp stays on. There we go. All right, that's on. We've got our voltmeter ready. Once it fires up, we're going to check our voltage. Before, it was only doing 9 or 10 volts. Now we're hoping to see that 14 volt range. Fire and hold. DC voltmeter set to maximum 20 volts. Ground on ground, hot on hot. 14.8. That's what you want to see. Good deal. Looks like the alternator's charging good. Holding steady. I think we're going to be good. So there you have it. Green Monster truck is resurrected once again and charging. Yeah, well, we're at 13.2, so it already put a little charge in that battery because it was pretty weak from before where it wasn't charging. So green monster rods again. We've actually covered quite a bit on this one. Everything from the newer version of the alternator has you splicing into the harness. We got a parts harness off the other 92 Bronco and replaced the factory harness, so we had the plug so that we could use my spare alternator off the shelf, which ended up being clocked wrong, and we had to do that deal where we took the case apart and moved it, which in turn, if you go back and look at the I don't know if it all captured it in the time lapse, but we had to put the brushes back in. We had that bolt break off in the front housing, so we had to get another parts alternator that had a good front housing and a bad back housing, and use the front housing with a bolt at it yet to put everything back together. And then we hooked everything up and it worked. So it's always nice and satisfying when you can get something going with the parts you have on hand, and it reminds you of why you keep spare parts and parts vehicles. So green monster rods again. Thanks for tuning in. Catch us again next time on Rusty Relic Revivals. Thank you.